All right, guys, let's talk about bolts real quick. These are all Inception bolts. This is a modified V1 bolt. This is a stock V1 bolt, V2, and Trident bolt. V1 bolt had a narrow porthole. V2 had a slightly larger porthole, and then Trident bolt has basically a huge porthole. There's a couple other differences, like the radius cut and no radius cut, the shape of the very tip. So this has a chamfer, and this only has a chamfer on the top. This only has a chamfer on the top. But that's pretty much it. So big differences between the V1 and the Trident bolt is the porthole size and the adjustability of the timing. So the V1 bolt had a very narrow window for the timing, and if you changed it outside of that window, you had velocity issues, you had blowback. Basically, guys, if they did any build, custom build, they ended up with issues because they couldn't necessarily get it in the timing window to keep the velocity up. The guns shipped from Inception and they were good to go, but if you didn't have it set up the same way that Inception did, there were issues. So then that was for the V1 bolt. So the V2 bolt, they opened the port a little bit, widened that timing, and then helped significantly reduce the blowback. Trident bolt should probably have no blowback, and should be basically the top tier. It's been great. So I use the Trident bolt in a lot of my markers. The large porthole allows for a larger timing window. Basically means you can set it up as close as you could possibly set it up, or as long as you can possibly set it up. It doesn't really care. It's just has a huge hole, lets the airflow through, all is good. V1 had a specific setup for the timing that it preferred, I guess is probably the best way to say it. If you didn't have it set up that way, you had blowback issues, velocity issues. So what I wanted to do is I had some V1 and V2 bolts kicking around. I wanted to modify the V1 bolt to be similar to the Trident bolt so that I could use them on markers that I build. I've got a couple markers kicking around that I'd like to swap bolts out in, and this was kind of the solution that I came up with, was an elongated port, centered. I haven't tried adjusting to the, I guess, more square shape. So that may be the next revision. I may try and do that and see what happens. But the velocity jump for the timing that I have set up basically goes from about 205 to 275, and then to swap the Trident bolt in, it goes to 285. So between these two bolts, there's about 10 feet per second difference. Between these two bolts, there's about 70 feet per second difference. Now my paint that I'm shooting is absolutely horrible. It took multiple takes to get each video because the paint was blowing up in the barrel. Super brittle, inconsistently sized, but the shots that I do have across these three bolts are able to tell you how significant the difference are between these two bolts and also the Trident bolt. So if you do have a Trident bolt in your marker, don't need to worry. If you're looking to buy a bolt, used, pick up a Trident bolt. They're great. If you have a V1 or V2 and you have velocity issues and whatever else, you don't want to buy a new bolt, I could offer it as a service. If guys are interested, I don't know if they would be interested. If so, I'm happy to offer it. It's pretty easy for me to do on my end. But I don't know if it makes sense for shipping back and forth and then paying me to modify it and whatever else. But something to consider if you guys are looking for that, or you have a bunch of V1, V2 bolts kicking around. But yeah, so that's basically what I did. I elongated the port. I dropped the port 2 and then radius the bottom. So it all looks good, and maybe I'll try and post some pictures, Facebook, Instagram. We'll see what happens. But I do have a couple V2 bolts, so I'll probably modify those as well. Probably try and do one of the more rectangular ports. And then I know that the difference between the V2, probably need to do a comparison between the V1, V2 stock, and then the V2 modified. And then whichever shape ends up being the most, I guess, giving me the most velocity for my timing is probably what I'll end up machining all of them for. So, but yeah, if this is something that you'd like to see, or if there's another bolt that has issues, happy to take a look at that too. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. So I'm going to do a little comparison between the Inception bolts here. This is one of the early ones, not the soft tip, but the one, I guess the hard tip, which has a small hole and had velocity issues. So we'll compare that against one that I modified. So 202, 204, 206, 207. So this is a modified, I guess, hard-nosed V1 bolt. So we'll see how it stacks up against the unmodified one. 281, 278, 277, there's a no read, 273, 274, 280. This is the Inception Trident bolt. 249, 288, 281, 288, 282, 287, 279, 282, 286.